We'll start from the least bloody wars and work our way towards what will probably keep you up at night. Number 10. Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars were pioneered by none other than everyone's favorite fun-sized Frenchman. After coming into power in 1803, the first thing Napoleon did was pick a fight with the original war veterans, Great Britain. In 1805, the first battle was against France and an alliance of the United Kingdom, the Austrian Empire, the Russian Empire, Naples, Sicily, and Sweden. TLDR, France won and Austria promised to back off permanently. The next two battles had a 1-to-1 win-loss ratio. In 1809, Austria entered the ring again, breaking its pinky promise with France. The battle was named the Bloody Battle of Wagram. But despite the cool name, it was a win for the French and a defeat for the Austrians. France entered into a bit of a downfall after this point. From 1812 to 1815, Napoleon faced crushing defeats one after the other, especially the battle in Russia that almost killed off the entire French army. And finally, the Napoleonic Wars reached their dramatic conclusion at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The total death toll of the Napoleonic Wars ranges from 3.5 million to 6 million. Number 9. Second Congo War. For the Second Congo War, there's two things to keep in mind. One, there's two groups, the Tutsi and the Hutu at the center of things. Two, they don't get along. Laurent Desire Kabila was put in place of the dictator Mobutu Sese Seko by the Tutsi militia group with the help of Uganda. Kabila was seen as a puppet of the Tutsi and foreign military forces by his people, and realized that it's easier to invite people into your country than it is to ask them to leave. And when he did try to balance the scales, it ended up triggering the Second Congo War. And the scale of the Second Congo War made the first one look like a schoolyard fight. Child soldiers as young as 8, village massacres, widespread disease, slavery, cannibalism, and famine are just a few of the symptoms of the war. In one incident, at least 186 men and boys from a single village were beheaded by a militant group. The Second Congo War erupted in 1998 as Rwanda and Uganda invaded to oust Kabila. The conflict spiraled as other African nations joined sides. And although the war ended only 5 years later, it was dubbed Africa's World War due to its high death toll of around 5.4 million people. Number 8. 30 Years' War. You can't really talk about deadly wars and massacres without mentioning the Catholic Church. This war began when a Catholic emperor thought God chose him to spread Catholicism to everyone in his realm. You'd think he'd send preachers, fund education or monasteries, or maybe even put on a musical, but no. He simply decreed that everyone in his realm should be a Catholic, even the nobility. At least he believed in equality. The Protestants rightfully lost their mind and joined other Protestant countries like Denmark and Sweden to rebel, but the Catholic countries like Spain and Austria jumped in too. For a while, the Catholics were winning, but then Sweden and France joined the Protestants. They fought a bunch of battles, with both sides winning some. No matter who you rooted for, people died because of both Catholics and Protestants. Many cities and towns were massacred, pillaged, and the women taken as slaves. One incident recorded in history is the sack of Magdeburg. In 1961, Catholic forces attacked the city of Magdeburg, which had a population of 25,000 people. When the Catholics sacked the city, they killed 20,000 people in the process, and as I said, this is just one incident. Finally, in 1648, everyone was tired of fighting, so they signed a peace treaty and ended the war. The death toll was estimated at 4.5 to 8 million people. Number 7. Chinese Civil War. China had a long-standing history spanning centuries, but one of the country's deadliest civil wars occurred not even 100 years ago. The Chinese Civil War of 1927 to 1937 began the same as our last entry, with two conflicting parties, the Chinese Nationalist Party and the Chinese Communist Party, led by everyone's favorite dictator, Mao Zedong. The war started in 1927, when the Nationalists began a campaign against the Communists, and as a result, many lives were lost on both sides in battles, like the Shanghai Massacre and the Fifth Encirclement Campaign. But when Japan invaded Manchuria, both parties joined forces to fight against Japan, proving that to get along, you just need to bring in someone you both hate more than each other. After Japan's defeat in World War I, both parties' hatred was again directed towards each other. In 1949, Mao Zedong declared the establishment of the People's Republic of China, which made the nationalists run to Taiwan. The war officially ended in 1950, with the communists in control of mainland China and the nationalists in control of Taiwan. Guess they both won some and lost some. Estimated death toll for the Chinese Civil War is around 7 to 10 million people. Number 6. Russian Civil War. With the second Civil War entry on this list, you've got to ask yourself, why do civil wars happen? The caveman explanation really boils down to, if people are unhappy, they riot. which is the starting point of the Russian Civil War. After World War I, the Russian economy hit rock bottom, and civilians were not too happy to be starving. The war officially began after the Romanov monarchy was overthrown and the Bolsheviks rose to power. The two main forces in the war were the Reds and the Whites. The Reds were the Bolsheviks, led by none other than Vladimir Putin's great-great-grandfather, and the Whites were everyone else who hated the Reds. Later on, other countries like Britain, France, US, and even Germany got involved. The war was very brutal on the only people war affects most: the peasants. I mean, common people. Entire villages were massacred, along with the usual looting, assaulting, torturing, and burning. To put into perspective, a mass grave in Izium had an estimated of 440 corpses all bundled up in one grave. The Reds, being the more organized group, defeated the Whites, and in 1922, they formed the Soviet Union. Total death toll is estimated somewhere between 7 to 12 million people. Number 5. Dungan Revolt. There are several moments in history where if the person involved decided to do something else, history would have been completely different. Like Captain America getting the Infinity Gauntlet instead of Iron Man, that one dictator getting accepted into painting school, or that one bamboo seller not being racist towards a customer in ancient China. China's Hui people, a Muslim ethnic group, faced discrimination. Limited access to education and jobs restricted their opportunities and were largely excluded from government positions. The conflict began in 1862, when a simple argument over bamboo poles between a Han merchant and a Hui customer escalated into a full-scale war between the two ethnic groups. The Hui people wanted to create a new Muslim state in the region, but the Han Chinese weren't about to let that happen. The uprising had devastating results on the people, with ruthless massacres, along with forced conversions and forced labor committed by both sides. The war was eventually suppressed by a Qing general. The total death toll was estimated at 8 to 10 million people, making it one of the deadliest conflicts in Chinese history. Number 4. The Three Kingdom War. Another entry from China on this list is the Three Kingdom War, which lasted around 60 years. The war was basically a Game of Thrones-style succession battle between the three emerging kingdoms of Wei, Shu, and Wu after the Han Dynasty fell. The major turning point of the war was the Battle of Red Cliff, where the Wu and Shu kingdom joined forces against the Wei kingdom. The Wei kingdom had a naval fleet much larger, and I mean much larger than the other two kingdoms combined, so they resorted to using dirty tactics, or strategies, whichever floats your boat. One of the generals basically lied about wanting to surrender, and when the Wei kingdoms arrived, they sent over exploding ships, decimating the Wei kingdom's fleet. And that's just one instance of backstabbing in this war. Overall, the war took a total of 60 years before being ended by a dude from the Wei clan who united all of China under his banner. The estimated death toll of this approximately 60-year war is around 36 to 40 million people. Number 3. World War I. The main cause of World War I was the assassination of the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, a big shot on the road to become king. This led to Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. Other nations jumped in and began to pick sides. Fights broke out between Germany and France, backed by Britain in the west, and in the east, Russia held its own against Germany, backed by Austria-Hungary. War always comes with some of the most nightmare-inducing horrors, and World War I was no exception. There was the ransacking and pillaging of Belgium by German forces, the details of which are bound to get me demonetized. Mass hangings by the Austro-Hungarian soldiers. Russia, with its scorched earth policy, literally. They burned crops and destroyed infrastructure, leading to the death of millions of civilians. And you can't have a war without genocide, so the Ottoman Empire takes credit for that. They killed an estimated 1.5 million Armenians through massacres, forced labor, and starvation. Midway into the war, Russia pulls out due to the Bolshevik takeover and civil revolt, and in 1918, Germany and Austria-Hungary collapse. An armistice agreement was signed, signaling the end of the war. Germany was also forced to sign the Treaty of Versailles, which severely punished them with heavy reparations, territorial losses, and military restrictions. The total estimated death toll for World War I was about 40 million people. Number 2. Mongol invasions and conquests. There are a lot of horrible, disgusting, and downright evil atrocities on this list, but none of them are quite as creative as what the Mongols did when they decided to take over the world. The Mongols started their conquests in the early 13th century, starting in northern China. They then expanded their empire to include Central Asia, Eastern Europe, and the Middle East. They were not merciful enemies. When they decided to take over your country, they went all in. When they massacred the people of Baghdad, the death toll ranged from 400,000 to 1 million. And that's just one city in the Middle East. They were also ahead of their time in biological warfare, where they'd catapult diseased corpses into besieged cities, spreading diseases like the Black Plague. But what else can one expect from a general that came with a killer speech like this? I am the punishment of God. If you had not committed great sins, God would not have inflicted a punishment such as me upon you. It makes you wonder what was strong enough to do him in. Well, history is kind of unsure. His cause of death ranges from a fall to an arrow to a disease. But the most interesting part is that even his death led to the massacre of 2,000 people. When Genghis Khan died, his soldiers carried his body back to Mongolia, killing anyone they encountered along the way. And then they killed the 2,000 slaves who attended his funeral too, all to protect the location of his grave. Total death toll is estimated between 40 million and 75 million people. Number 1. World War II. And finally, the bloodiest free-for-all in human history, World War II. If you paid attention in history class, then okay, show off. Why are you watching? For the rest of the normal people who barely remember the 50 states of America, let's take a look at World War II. The one who kicked off World War II was none other than the dictator of all dictators. After his invasion of Poland, the United Kingdom and France declared war on Germany, and eventually the war expanded to include many other countries. It was mainly fought between the Axis powers and Allied powers. The bloody and dirty details of World War II would need their own separate video, but I'll try to paint a picture. Throughout the 6 years of the war, somewhere between 70 to 85 million people died, making it the bloodiest war in history.